Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, H. pylori from Diagnosis to Therapeutics. Today's webinar is presented by Dr. Daniel Kalish. Dr. Kalish is dedicated to teaching doctors functional medicine philosophy and practices. He has trained over 1,000 practitioners worldwide in the Kalish method, which solves patient challenges through a proven lab-based approach by means of the Kalish Institute's educational programs. We would also like to let you know that any questions not answered during the presentation will be answered via email after the webinar. So whenever you are ready, Dr. Kalish, take it away.
All right, thank you so much for hosting. Excited to be here talking about my favorite infection, H. pylori. So, from diagnosis to therapeutics, I've treated personally 1,000, maybe 2,000 H. pylori cases in the training programs that I run. I don't know, we see them every day, 5 days a week. So I don't know, that adds up probably to tens of thousands of these H. pylori cases. It's a really interesting infection, and it's often missed in conventional medicine, and we can help people a lot by appropriately treating H. pylori. So it's worthy of an hour of your time to think about this. So this is me, Dan Kalish. I have a rather checkered past. I grew up in Berkeley, California, ended up becoming a chiropractor, ended up kind of crawling up the food chain of functional medicine just because I wore everybody out because I've been doing it for 30 years, which is like one of the old guys now. But I've been on the faculty at IFM. I've done research projects with the Mayo Clinic. In fact, our research project with Mayo proved through Mayo Clinic research that out of the 9 H. pylori cases that we had in our research study, the Kalish method solved 8 of them, 8 out of 9. And that earned me a trip to Japan one year because the Japanese are really into H. pylori. They want to learn about this secret Kalish method thing that was happening to solve H. pylori problems. Right now, very excited to be working with Dr. Richard Lord, who's one of really the industry leading scientists in our field that developed a lot of the testing that we do, organic acids and fatty acids. And he and I are putting together a whole slew of programs coming up this year, which I'm really excited about. We'll be launching on amino acids and B vitamins and all this other stuff. So I'm also still in practice, been practicing for a long time, and really I deal with H. pylori, like I said, every day of the week, and it's something that we should all just sort of reflect upon. And today's talk, we wanted to focus on a practical version. So I'm going to talk for a while with some slides. I'm going to show some lab tests so you guys can see how this really works with a GI map testing, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end, okay? And I'm not going to spend too much time on the slides. I'm going to skip through these kind of quickly so we can get to the good stuff. We can look at some labs. But the objective is that you can figure out the kind of people that you should be doing this with, right? Who should you treat H. pylori with? And then who should you not, right? And if they're tired, they have mood issues, they have chronic inflammation anywhere in their body, a lot of these H. pylori people have non-GI symptoms. They don't know that it's H. pylori that's causing their inflammatory back pain problem or their skin rashes. They just don't have an awareness that it's coming from their gut. So I want to talk about also the clear-cut GI symptoms that can manifest. Those are the easy ones to figure out, and understand how chronic H. pylori infections can interfere with amino acid absorption. What does that mean? That's like the most devastating effect of H. pylori, in my opinion, right? Is that, okay, maybe you're not going to get stomach cancer, you don't have an ulcer, but what's happening with the amino acid absorption when your stomach's not working, and how does that impact the entire body? We'll talk about that quite a bit. And then we can look at some cases, right, with GI map testing. So Kalish method, we think about this, and I was trained in this by a naturopath many, many decades ago about how to address GI infections in general, and H. pylori is probably the best example of this stepwise approach, meaning that you want to reduce inflammation, get the lifestyle factors figured out, you want to support secretory IgA levels through an adrenal program before you do all the killing. And that a very common reason why people fail with these programs is because they see H. pylori and then they just want to get rid of it, either with antibiotics or herbs. And it's just not really an effective strategy. You need to think through why it's there, why it's flaring up, and how is stress related to H. pylori, and how can you control for or treat the stress response as the initial opening round in the treatment, get the lifestyle figured out, and then clearing the H. pylori out is relatively straightforward. If you do not address the stress component or the HPA axis component or the adrenal component, and you just go on a killing spree right away, it's not as likely to work. So that's one common, sort of misunderstanding. The second one is that H. pylori can manifest in bladder infections, in depression and anxiety. I've had a half a dozen patients whose main complaint was insomnia. They couldn't, get to sleep and stay asleep, which was resolved completely the moment we treated H. pylori. Seen that over and over again as a pattern. So, and those patients didn't say my stomach hurts. Those patients were like, oh, now that that stomach thing is done, Kalish, I don't know what you did, but I'm sleeping through the night. I'm not waking up anymore. Guess I was waking up because my stomach hurt and I didn't realize it, So this is a wide spread effects. And when we talk about the amino acids and how it plays into amino acids, I think you'll really understand why that happens. Now, the obvious ones are gas, bloating, acid reflux. Like that's a no-brainer that obviously you should check the person's stomach and fix the infection. But the less obvious ones, anxiety, ADD, HD, problems with depression, weight gain, fatigue. And again, we'll look at that when we talk about amino acids. And so, one of the things that I think is kind of interesting is just about the human psychology of all this is that there's symptom clusters and the patients relate to their experience that they're tired all the time, they have heartburn all the time, they're bloating all the time, but they really are pretty removed from what's actually driving the problems, which in this case, we're really focusing on H. pylori. And in fact, the symptoms can change over time. H. pylori could cause heartburn, and a few years later, the heartburn might be gone, and now the person's anxious and depressed. And the symptoms can change of H. pylori so significantly that they don't parallel the original problem. And so there's important questions to ask people along these lines, which are, when did this problem first start? And what else was going on in your life around that time? So that you have a broader understanding of how the H. pylori is played into their overall health picture. That's pretty important because most people forget the original onset of problems, of original set of symptoms, and are just dealing with what's in front of them right now. And you want to take people back so they understand this sort of bigger picture. And in the way that I teach this in all the mentorship courses I do is we look at this from a systems approach, a body systems approach. And I've just made up these 3 systems to make it easy. This is not systems biology. That's a whole subset of super smart people at like Princeton and Johns Hopkins that are doing stuff. This is like Dan body systems. There's 3 of them, okay? Neuroendocrine, GI, and detox. And the idea is that when we're stressed, because we're not eating right, we're not exercising right, we're not sleeping well, we're not meditating, when we're stressed, that stress throws off the neuroendocrine and hence the GI system. And no more is that obvious than with H. pylori, right? Where when you're stressed, H. pylori flares and people get symptoms of what we call an ulcer. And that is a super important thing, just to have some kind of a model so you can explain to people why this is happening and why this is flaring up. Now, on the digestive side, and again, I think this is like the low-hanging fruit, which is just kind of obvious, but belching, nausea, constipation, history of ulcers, constant need for digestive enzymes just to digest your food, having to do some wacky diet like food combining or some crazy elimination diet, and that's the only way they can feel good, upper abdominal pain, all these kind of obvious symptoms that tie right back to H. pylori are easy to explain to patients. But where it gets a little more complicated is when it's depression or anxiety, and you want to have some kind of framework for explaining to people, I want to test your gut. I want to run this GI map test. But why, Dr. Kalish? Because I have depression and anxiety. When you say, well, I believe that the body's connected, and that if you're not digesting and absorbing proteins, which that protein digestion process starts in the stomach, if that's not happening and there's an infection in your stomach, you could have depression because of a lack of amino acids or because of chronic inflammation coming from the stomach. Chronic inflammation blocks the conversion of T4 to T3 that can cause thyroid problems. Chronic inflammation is well known to impact the brain in a very negative way. and amino acid deficiencies, right? So you have a good explanation for why you want to run this test on people that don't have digestive symptoms. People that have digestive symptoms, a little more obvious why you might want to do it, okay? But having those explanations down is pretty important. So then what's coming up, just so you know, at Kalish Institute is we have a mentorship program that's starting now, like right now. If you want to sign up, you can use that $1,000 off discount code, VIP Jan21. And that's the full-on 1-year training program where you're just like inundated with GI map information, parasites, bacteria, yeast. We do tons of information around GI organs. And we do other testing too, like organic acids and adrenals. Very comprehensive training program. And then for those of you interested in just boosting up your business and you don't want to deal with the clinical part, we have a business boot camp coming up in a couple weeks as well, where we just take a month or 2 out and focus on business issues. And I think it's the first time we did this. We're giving a discount on the business course if you're interested, DS 2021. Will get you 20% off on the business bootcamp. Okay, so those are our 2 programs that we have coming up if you want to learn more about the way that we work with practices. Okay, so back to our regularly scheduled programming here. H. pylori, there it is, that's what it looks like. Messes up your stomach lining, right? It burrows in there and causes problems. Damage to the stomach lining, reduction of stomach acid, common in patients with all these different symptoms. You can get it from food, you can get it from another person. But what I really want to dwell on a little bit here is, okay, so it's messing up your stomach. You can't break down amino acids because that's part of what the stomach is doing. Obviously, they get broken down further in your your small intestine, but this is really important to have normal stomach function. So this leads to the inability to produce proteins throughout the body. This leads to the inability to produce proteins throughout the body, which has body-wide ramifications. You're tired because you can't make hemoglobin. You have unstable blood sugar because you can't make insulin. You're tired and even more tired because you can't make enzymes for pyruvate, so you can't make acetyl-CoA, you can't make ATP. Your immune system's not doing that well because you need amino acids to make antibodies. What are the things that we make out of protein? So again, think about it. You got this infection in your stomach. Why does that matter? Because when you can't get amino acids broken down properly from your food because your stomach's messed up, you can't make antibodies, enzymes, thyroid hormones, FSH, insulin, hemoglobin, a bunch of the neurotransmitters, the list goes on and on. So this is why H. pylori infections are so important to find, even if the person has no digestive symptoms. That's the most important point to take home from today. You got to test everybody. Who do you want to test? Every single patient you have to run a GI map on. My teacher, Dr. Bill Timmons, no longer with us. Well, he's in the spirit world, but he's not on the planet anymore. He died a bunch of years ago. But I do feel like he kind of talks to me. Like all morning long, I was teaching the mentorship classes, and I swear that felt like he was in the room, just like laughing. I don't know, it's kind of funny. But anyways, right back to these old school naturopaths, right? You absolutely have to. You couldn't talk to Dr. Timmons unless you'd done a digestive test. He wouldn't even allow you to sign up as a new patient until you completed a GI panel. All right? Now, they didn't have the GI map back in those days, but I'm sure he would have endorsed it because he's very interested in cutting edge technology throughout his whole career. And so again, you can't even sit down and have a rational conversation with a patient, regardless of what their condition is, unless you have a GI test that you're looking at. Okay, that's that important. And now you're thinking, okay, well, why is it that important? Well, let's go look at if you have H. pylori, let alone all these other infections that are looked for, right? If you have H. pylori, you can't absorb amino acids. You can't make what? Storage proteins like hemoglobin and ferritin. Is that important? Kinda, right? For carrying around your oxygen. How are you going to feel if you can't make hemoglobin adequately? Tired. Are you going to have heartburn? No, you're going to be tired. That'll be the symptoms. Hormones can be proteins too. That's what insulin looks like. It's a bunch of amino acids folded up into this really kind of amazing looking shape. You can't make insulin if you don't have amino acids. You can't make pyruvate dehydrogenase. This is the enzyme that allows us to make glucose turn into energy or ATP. It's an amazing and big and complex structure with all these different proteins linked together. They're all made from amino acids. You can't make that protein without amino acids. And if you have H. pylori, you're not going to have enough amino acids. Immunoglobulins, kind of popular right now because we're going through a worldwide pandemic. Totally understand that. Yep, they're proteins. You cannot make antibodies if you're missing amino acids. Even one single amino acid out of the 20 that are important will block your body's ability to make all these different compounds, immunoglobulins, stuff to make mitochondrial energy work, stuff to make your insulin okay and blood sugar stable, stuff to carry oxygen. Okay, this is why H. pylori is important, because if you have H. pylori, you can't do all those other things, and that's why people could have a hormone imbalance, a fatigue problem, or depression because of H. pylori, because it's the amino acids that they're not absorbing. Okay, that's just basic science, basic biochemistry, physiology. It's not even a naturopathic idea. That's just how your body works. So prevalence, people get it oftentimes from food. Sometimes you get it from, kissing someone that has it. I've had 2, 3-year-old children who have it from, being cuddled by their moms. It's an easy to pass on infection. And again, that's what it looks like. If you have some downtime and you're tired of reading the news, just Google H. pylori Nobel Prize. And you can read, there's a couple 3-page, maybe 4-page document that's online that talks about the Nobel Prize they gave out to the researchers that found H. pylori causes ulcers. And that's where this diagram is from the Nobel Committee's information. And it's quite an infection, but the hallmark of it is it causes inflammation. Sometimes it causes ulcers and stomach pain, but all the time, H. pylori causes inflammation and it blocks the body's ability to digest and absorb proteins. Why does that matter? Now you don't have amino acids. Why does that matter? Insulin, hemoglobin, neurotransmitters, antibodies. You're missing one amino acid. You can't string together those polypeptides. You're missing one amino acid. You can't make those compounds. And that's why people with H. pylori have global problems like depression and joint pain and all these other things because of the malabsorption part of it, right? Not the actual infection itself, it's the results of the infection and how devastating that can be on the body. So guidelines for H. pylori, test for H. pylori, the PCR test that is offered by GI Map is excellent, and I use that in my practice on a regular basis. Then once you find it, you want to eliminate it. Then you want to make the microbiome a better place, a happier neighborhood to live, right? And then you want to make sure that you retest to make sure it's gone. Now, testing is important and finding the infection is important, but it's very easy to get lulled into thinking that you got rid of the H. pylori because a person says they feel better, but you didn't. So you want to double check with a retest as often as you can. Patients are not always going to go for that. It's a little expensive. Maybe they don't want to do the retest. Maybe they feel so much better, they don't want to do another test. But I really try to convince people to make sure that this thing is gone. And then there's all kinds of different lab testing available. Endoscopic exams fail to catch it a lot of the time. The breath test is designed for acute infections. We're looking for chronic, so that usually misses it. There's blood tests, but the antibodies can go back to normal after a long-term infection. So stool PCR testing, as done at GI Map, is kind of a gold standard accuracy-wise way to find it. And oftentimes you'll have patients who find it on a GI Map and they'll miss it on other labs. That's very common. So, and again, most of the other lab techniques are looking for acute infections. We're worried about chronic. And this is just a note to remind myself, to tell you that, it's not just about H. pylori. You also want to do the dietary changes. Oftentimes you're going to have other pathogens involved. And so it's, a little more complicated than just getting rid of the one bug. Then you want to sequence it, right? And what's the sequence? Well, you want to address the, let me skip back here for a second. Here's the sequence. You want to test and correct the adrenals, get the lifestyle stuff figured out, get them on a good diet, give them a month or 2 of that, and then aggressively go after the H. pylori. So you want to treat the stress response, get that cleared up, 1 or 2 months, and then go after the H. pylori once you feel like they're kind of snapping out of that. it's hard to get rid of H. pylori in someone who's, stressed out of their mind is another way of sort of summarizing all that. So H. pylori treatment, my medical doctor friends, I'm a chiropractor by training, so I can't prescribe stuff, right? But my medical doctor friends use Prev packs all the time. That's a lot of antibiotics, and they're, hesitant to do that unless they have to. I think most of the MDs that I'm good friends with prefer to use the herbs if they can, but they use the medications if they have to. In my practice, I'll refer out if it's, urgent and the person's bleeding and they have a big ulcer and they need a prescription, but 92% of the time, I'm going to treat with the herbs. Mastica, slippery elm, DGL. I also use zinc carnosine a lot in the programs. And of course, probiotics, multi-strain probiotics, high potency. Sometimes we'll even do 2 or 3 different types of probiotics simultaneously, like a bifidobacter, a spore-based one. Maybe sometimes my favorite probably is Saccharomyces boulardii. So 2 or 3 different probiotics at the same time to really try to recolonize and get that working. And then of course you can do anti-inflammatory stuff like GI repair powders. Now a special slide here for kids because I've treated a lot of kids with H. pylori, and I don't know why, but it just seems to happen to children a lot, and it's really quite devastating. They'll have nausea, they'll be throwing up every day, they're not able to go to school, stomach pain every time they eat a piece of pizza, that kind of thing. And I had one summer, I don't know, when was this? This is like maybe 2005 or something like that, where I had a clinic in San Francisco at the time. In the back, and this is a true story, I started an organic yoga clothing line. Don't ask me why, because I don't know why. But anyways, I started an organic yoga clothing line. It was actually very successful for a short period of time before it completely failed. And in the back of the store in San Francisco, I had a clinic, which sounds crazy now I'm telling you the story. But anyways, that summer in San Francisco, I was treating patients, and these kids started to show up. Like every week, there would be another kid with H. pylori, and was getting, by the end of the summer, I was just like overwhelmed with all these children, ages like maybe 10 to 16 age range that all had H. pylori. They all had the same symptoms. It wasn't even complicated. They have everything on this page here. They all had stomach pain, nausea. They were all throwing up. They couldn't focus. They couldn't do well, in school or athletic activities, and they were tired. So, don't be shy about testing kids. It's an important thing to deal with, whether it's an adult or a child. And then it's an old patient of mine. I like to use it as an example. Fatigue, insomnia, woke up at night with stomach pain. This was one of the first times that I realized that H. pylori could cause insomnia. And what happened with Jesse was we treated the H. pylori. He came back. He's like, I just realized I was waking up at night because my stomach hurt. I was like, really? He's like, yeah, I didn't even know that's what was happening because it stopped happening and I'm sleeping through the night now for the first time. So he didn't even put together that he was waking up because his stomach hurt until it stopped. So he didn't come in and say, oh, I can't sleep at night because my stomach hurts. He didn't know that that was happening until it went away. And it went away right when we treated his H. pylori. He also had severe amino acid depletion. Neurotransmitter levels were really low. So we had anxiety and depression and fatigue and the things that you would think about that would affect you cognitively, right? If you can't make enough brain chemicals. And he had blastocystis hominis, which is another infection that can show up that's paired with H. pylori often. Why, I don't know, but those often are paired together. And all these problems started when he was under high stress playing on a college level basketball team, college sports, Division A or whatever they call it. I don't know, like one of the top teams in the country. Not top 10, but maybe top 20 or 30 or something like that. And super high stress, working really hard, playing basketball on this college team, and whole life fell apart, right? And so it's not always exactly obvious, and be sure to check kids, be sure that you are checking people that don't have digestive symptoms. They're saying that they can't sleep at night, but they're not aware that it's because of the stomach pain. Integrative treatment programs. So number one, adrenal support. I like to do the salivary testing or the Dutch test and get those done, and then correct problems using DHEA and pregnenolone. Do a lot of teaching around adrenal programs. And that to me is like round one in reducing the stress on the HPA axis so that you can effectively knock out the bug with either medications or herbal products. I always prefer the herbs if you can do that. And then recolonize with the probiotics that we mentioned. Okay, so step one, again, stress and diet addressing. Step two, killing the bugs. And then step three, the repair process. Now, I'm going to say this one more time because I think this is what I see most people messing up, you know, where they're trying to kill the H. pylori or the Giardia or crypto, whatever the bug is, before they test and correct the adrenal hormones. And this again is right out of the Dr. Timmons playbook. He wanted to prepare the body to treat the GI infections. He thought the GI infections were the most important thing, but he wanted to maximize the odds that the program was going to work, right? By tilting the playing field in his favor by working on the adrenals, strengthening secretory IgA, cleaning up the lifestyle stuff to make all that, more likely that it was going to work when he got to the killing point. Now, I just threw this in. I'm not going to read the slide. I hate it when people read slides. This is just a reminder for me to say, hey, wait a minute. H. pylori is not always bad. And you can read the slide later if you're really kind of curious about it. But the summary here is that H. pylori can be protective. There's research that shows that H. pylori can improve digestion or improve the immune system or improve the person's overall health. Those are not the people that are coming into my office when, and I'm sure there are millions of people out there in whom H. pylori is a positive force in their life. But in my practice, when we get rid of H. pylori, people get better. So I am a strong advocate of treating it if you find it. And I'm sure the people that have H. pylori for whom it's protective and it's a good organism probably just are not sick, right? And they're not coming into offices like mine. So I have a very distorted view of this based on the fact that I treat people who are pretty sick. So key concepts to summarize, and then we'll look at some case studies. Number one, H. pylori causes damage to the stomach lining, reduces stomach acid production, so amino acids are not absorbed. Chronic inflammation and low amino acid levels impacts every cell in the body. I think that should be a singular, impact every cell in the body. All right, let's just think about that for a second. H. pylori can cause digestive symptoms. Everyone agrees on that. That's relatively easy. I don't think you need to attend a webinar for someone to tell you that. The point that's extra special here is H. pylori always causes damage to the stomach lining and reduces stomach acid production and interferes with amino acid absorption. Whether the person has stomach pain or not, whether the person has GERD or not, whether the person is vomiting or not, even without any digestive problems, there's always going to be inflammation and a block of absorption of amino acids. If you don't believe me, Google H. pylori Nobel Prize Committee, because it is directly on that Nobel Prize Committee report that in all patients, H. pylori causes inflammation, right from the, scientific kind of oracle, right? Nobel Prize folks don't mess around and they don't write things that are kind of silly. When I read that, I was like, whoa, guys, hey, that's naturopathic medicine. I don't know if you knew that, but anyways, it's not symptomatically oriented. So second thing here, reduce inflammation through diet and lifestyle changes. That's the next big concept, right? You don't just kill. Got to get the person ready. Strengthening secretory IgA levels. That's through adrenal programs. Okay, we talk about that some other day, but that's a whole other kind of thing you should learn how to do. And I use DHEA and pregnenolone for the adrenal programs. And then kill all the bugs. I always do H. pylori first, but you may do others later, depending on the case. And let's see here. Oh yeah, let's talk about this one case. And then I have these labs I can pull up too here. Let's look at this so you can see a lab. All right, so here's pretty much what a lab looks like. And we're just going to focus on this one infection. We could do this all day long, talking about other bugs. But here's your GI map, and here's H. pylori. Pretty straightforward, right? They say hi, it's in red, kind of hard to miss. Although, and I'm not making this up, I don't know if any of my students are on this call right now, but this morning in class, Dr. Steve, I think it was Steve, I don't know, I think it was Steve, either Steve or Jason. This morning in class, one of the doctors presented a GI map in class. It was run by a different practitioner. The H. pylori was positive, and the other practitioner was like, take some probiotics. And the doctor in the mentorship program was like, hey, Dan, I got this lab in. I'm not really sure. I've never seen one of these before. It was his first GI map. He's like, some other doctor ran it, but did they do the right thing? I was like, nah, I don't think so, Steve. I think you should treat the H. pylori. And this patient had a massive amount of digestive symptoms that have been going on for years. So anyways, I don't think this is that complicated, but some people miss it. Maybe they don't get the point. If H. pylori is positive and they have anything to do with a GI symptom, or they have anything to do, you're suspecting now, right? Amino acid absorption problem, they're tired, they're depressed, something like that's going on, treat it. You're gonna get better. I don't know why people would, anyways, we don't want to get into that, but that just happened this morning. Similarly, people can have dysbiotic bacteria. Again, I find this pretty easy to interpret. They're doing everything they can here for us, right? It's in red, that's bad. Red is bad. High is bad. Okay, so red is bad, high is bad. Dysbiosis and no other bugs, okay? So, and here, the secretory IgA is low. So that's a poor immune response in the gut lining. The immunoglobulins are not doing that great. And they have a gluten-related problem. Okay, so this person needs an H. pylori treatment and maybe later a dysbiosis treatment to clear things out. And let me show you a typical patient presentation here. And these are like just my favorite H. pylori cases. I mean, I've had a couple thousand of these people, but this one I just remember so well because it was so crazy. So this woman, otherwise kind of healthy, normal human person, working as a bartender, and she got diagnosed as having depression and an eating disorder. And she was referred to me by an eating disorders professional counselor who was like, Dan, I'd like you to run some labs on this woman. She's like throwing up every day. And so basically she would wake up every morning and be nauseous and then start throwing up. And so she didn't want to eat because every time she ate, she would throw up. And so the eating disorders counselor was like, I don't know, Dan, she doesn't seem to have the normal eating disorders history. She's not trying to lose weight. She didn't think it was a psychological problem. And it turned out this poor woman had H. pylori. And as soon as we got rid of the H. pylori, her stomach pain went away. She stopped throwing up all the time. And then her mood got better because she was absorbing amino acids finally. I mean, I will never forget that. That was like a life lesson. It's like, whoa, you could really get a distorted view of things here if you're not careful. All right, let's look at another test here. And we're going to leave a lot of time for questions because I think there were a lot of questions that were coming in. So here's another case. Okay, again, it's in red. It says high. If you see that and the person has what? Any GI symptoms or anything that you suspect is related to not being able to break down protein. What's that? Antibodies and a compromised immune system, hemoglobin and a fatigue problem because they can't carry oxygen that great, insulin-related problem because you can't make insulin unless you have all the amino acids. So they could have a blood sugar handling problem that H. pylori is triggering. Remember all those slides on proteins? Oh, pyruvate dehydrogenase complex or succinate dehydrogenase, those enzymes that help the conversion of glucose go to acetyl-CoA so we can make energy. So most people that have H. pylori are going to have one or more of these problems. They're not going to carry oxygen real well. They're not going to be able to make energy out of glucose really well. So their blood sugar is going to be a little whacked out because insulin is just not that great. Their neurotransmitters are going to be messed up, right? Those are the consequences of H. pylori. That's why it can affect the whole body because it's centered in the stomach where protein digestion begins. Okay, so a high H. pylori This person has some low and high markers on their normal bacterial flora. That's probably for some other day. We can talk about microbiome stuff. I'm very interested in that. I just don't think we have time today. Okay. And then dysbiotic bacteria, again, high and red is bad. Treat it, as aggressively as you feel comfortable with. And then on this particular one, zonulin elevated and secretory IgA low. So this should be pretty straightforward for you guys to read the labs. And again, the treatments then are going to be in anyone that you suspect has either of these things, either the GI symptoms that are obvious or the amino acid absorption problems that are perhaps, I would say more common, but not as, I don't want to say subtle, but you just have to think through that stuff a little bit more, okay? So we're going to open it up for questions in a minute. I just want to mention that we, again, for those of you that came in late, we have a mentorship program starting now. If you're interested, you can get a discount on that. The mentorship program, we start a new one every couple months. If you're not ready now, you can do one a few months from now. It's a one-year program, kind of deep dive into all these different subjects and put together programs comprehensively for clinical treatment. That's a one-year class that we do. And then we have a boot camp coming up that's focusing on business essentials in February. If you guys are interested, you get a 20% discount off on that. And you make sure you use that discount code because we're not offering that through anyone else. So DS for Diagnostic Solutions 2021, DS 2021, okay? And that's a 2-month class on business development. Alrighty, now, so we have plenty of time to answer questions.
Thank you so much for that great presentation, Dr. Kalish. We have so many questions that there is no way we are going to get to them all today. I can start you off with this first one. Someone asked, what role does sugar consumption play in H. pylori infection? Is it necessary to curb or completely end sugar consumption to decrease infection?
Oh, that's a good question, isn't it? So sugar is not going to, you're going to have H. pylori or not. And I don't see that people that eat more sugar get H. pylori more often. That's my flippant but accurate answer. The answer I would give to a patient would be, oh, well, sugar weakens your immune system and it's never good. But honestly, I don't think that you can pin H. pylori on sugar like you could a yeast or fungal overgrowth. So I guess the answer is the thing is when you're doing these programs and you want to kill H. pylori, you got to make people sugar, gluten, and dairy free, just because all that stuff is so inflammatory and you're trying to reduce inflammation. But I don't think necessarily that people with higher sugar diets are more likely to get H. pylori.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question we have is, what is your order of treatment of a patient with H. pylori and SIBO?
So the way Timmons taught me was always H. pylori first. Why? Because if you have an infection in your stomach, your small intestine is guaranteed to have all kinds of problems because you don't have the proper, well, think about how you actually digest food, right? You chew your food, you swallow it, it hits your stomach, your body makes all this hydrochloric acid to break it down. And then that food contents of the stomach, I don't know, after an hour or whatever, starts to slowly go into your small intestine. It's the acidity of the food that's leaving your small intestine. I guess they call it chyme at that point, probably, right? But the foods is leaving the small intestine. It's super acidic. It hits your leaving the stomach. It hits your small intestine, and your small intestine freaks out because your small intestine is not super thick and protected and can deal with all this acid. So your small intestine goes, freaks out. And what does it do in response to that? Your pancreas goes, don't worry, I got this. And it cranks out a bunch of digestive enzymes to neutralize all the acid coming from the stomach. And then your gallbladder chimes in, right? That was kind of a pun, but it was kind of funny. Anyways, your gallbladder dumps in some bile to make all this, fat absorption work. So if you don't have good stomach acid production and you don't have good stomach function, then your pancreas can't release its stuff properly. It doesn't get that trigger. And then the bacteria in the small intestine go crazy, right? Because they don't have these normal brakes on them. And in fact, the acidity of the stomach is also part of what's going to kill all the bacteria that you're eating that are coming from your food. So H. pylori is going to trigger, for several different reasons, overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine, lack of pancreatic enzymes, lack of bile, and a problem with too many of the bacteria sneaking through the stomach's defenses in the first place if you don't have enough HCl. So anyways, you treat that first. That's the answer to the question.
Great, thank you. Our next question says, speaking about extraintestinal symptoms, have you seen a correlation between hypothyroidism, specifically low T3, and H. pylori?
Well, when you have H. pylori and you're inflamed, you're going to have a problem converting T4 to T3. That's what inflammation does, right? It blocks the conversion of thyroid hormones. And that same inflammation will trigger an adrenal problem because the adrenals make anti-inflammatory hormones. Corticosteroids are anti-inflammatory. And so as you develop H. pylori and it goes on for longer and longer, you have either an adrenal or a thyroid problem or both.
Our next question is, can H. pylori impact your sinuses as well? I am GI-MAP positive for H. pylori and right sinus is very inflamed.
I don't know. It depends on where you think the sinus problems are coming from. So I like to think of this globally. So globally, by globally, I mean mucosal tissues in general, the lining of the digestive tract, the lining of the vaginal tract, the lining of the lungs, the lining of the sinuses. These are all mucosal or lining tissues. And so if you think about it, like if you went to see a regular doctor and you're like, hey, doc, I got cold hands and I got cold feet. And then she looks at you and says, oh, well, I'm going to send you to a hand specialist and a podiatrist. Then you would think that she's a little crazy because you would think, well, that's kind of silly. I don't have a hand problem and a foot problem. It's a circulatory problem. Everybody knows cold hands and cold feet. It's the same problem. It's not separate. So circulatory system hits the whole body. The secretory IgA, right, that we just looked at on the test a minute ago that was low, that is secretory IgA not just in your gut, that's secretory IgA in all mucosal tissue. It's representative. I know it's a stool test, it's done from that, but when the SIG-A is low in the gut, it represents low SIG-A body-wide. And so if you have low SIG-A because of an infection in your stomach or your intestinal tract, it started there, it's going to impact like the urinary tract and make people more prone to having urinary tract infections because the SIG-A is weak there as well. It's going to create problems in your sinuses. So you're more likely to have sinus infections because the secretory IgA is weak there. So you get secretory IgA, it's a system, it's an integrated system throughout the body that includes all the mucosal tissues, even though they're in different parts of your body, right? There's one that's like in your head, the sinuses, there's the stomach and small intestine that are lower down. So that's, again, like naturopathic concept 101, that if the gut is damaged and infected and secretory IgA either goes up or even worse, drops down, that's going to make all these mucosal membrane tissues weak. And where's the one that we're all worried about right now? Because last time I checked this morning, there's a worldwide viral infection spreading. We're all worried about nasal mucosa, right? Because if you have really strong immune responses in your nose, inside your nose, and that little COVID virus gets up in there, poof, you just kill it. If that mucosal tissue is weak, the virus can invade and get into your lungs and other parts of your body. So that's an important question. And in fact, there's this research studies we were looking at earlier this week that show direct correlation between severity of COVID symptoms and degree of microbiome imbalance. The more imbalanced the microbiome was, the more likely the patients in the study were to develop more severe COVID symptoms. And that's all related, right? Secretory IgA is like the link there.
Great, thank you. We have another question. Do you encourage your patients with partners to get tested as well if it can be so easily passed between people?
Yeah, this just came up this morning. So I'm working with Abby, she's a patient, and I tell her you can get it from kissing someone who has it, even kind of like the smooching you do with your kids. She's like, oh, better check the kids. I'm like, yeah, probably should check both of them. And then unless you love one more than the other, she'd be kind of funny if she'd said, oh, let's check my daughter, but not my son. But no, she wanted to check them both, and they were both clear. And then she kind of hesitated for a while, and she's kind of a single mom, she hesitated for a while, and then she's like, oh, Dr. Kalish, I have a boyfriend. I have a guy I'm seeing right now. I don't know. She didn't really want to talk about it, but I was like, yeah, I probably should test him too, you know. And so I've tested a lot of couples over the years. Um, my favorite one, this is a true story. This is about 10 or 15 years ago, and this woman, she's probably like in her late 70s, right? And she's got H. pylori, and it really had devastated her life. I shouldn't be joking about it. It's not funny. She was really sick, primarily because of H. pylori. And so then she's like, well, what about Sam? You know, and I'm like, yeah, we should test your husband. And he had it. And we found this out like a month or two later. And then we all three got on the phone, and she was so pissed off at him. And she was like, I knew it was you. 1972, when we first met, that's when my problem started. And she just laid into this guy on the phone. It was kind of embarrassing and a little weird. But not all the time is that the case. Sometimes the patient can clearly identify, wow, I started kissing this guy in 1972, and that's when my health problem started. And 50 years later, I'm figuring out how to deal with it. And in the majority of spouses that I have tested, the partner who's not a patient has either been normal or has had it but no symptoms. Not too common that you get a couple that both have it and both have a lot of symptoms, but you can be, as we discussed in a little bit, that one kind of silly slide I had with the writing that you couldn't read, you know, because I went through too fast. You can be an asymptomatic carrier, and most people are. Most people that have H. pylori don't have any symptoms from it. It could even be slightly protective. But if you're married to one of the asymptomatic carriers and you have a big problem with it, you probably want the spouse tested and to get it out of them, assuming that you guys are, you know, on friendly enough terms that you're still kissing.
Great, thank you. We have another question. What do virulence factors for H. pylori indicate?
Well, I was just going to say virulence, but that's a little flippant. But it does seem, and my experience, that when the virulence factor, and I don't know all the sciencey stuff behind it. I leave that to the lab people. So you got to call the lab and talk to them about all the science behind it. But my clinical experience has been that when the virulence factors are positive, and again, they make this easy. It's all in red, right? And you just can't miss it kind of thing. That tends to be the people that have more severe problems from H. pylori, but not necessarily more digestive symptoms, just more symptoms in general. And as we discussed, 10% of this is digestive symptoms, right? 90% of this is protein problems.
Great, thank you. Our next question asks, how long do you wait to retest after treatment?
I don't know what the lab recommends, but I always wait 60 days. So killing program done, wait 60 days and then retest. I think that's predicated on the idea we want to give plenty of time for the thing to regrow and not retest, you know, a week or two later because it might not have come back up to levels that you can detect it.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, can H. pylori resolve on its own without treatment?
Well, first of all, most of the people that have it have no problems with it, right? So um, once it gets going and it's causing problems, well, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that because I don't work with healthy people. So every time I've seen it, it's been in a sick person and I've killed it and they've gotten better. And in fact, like someday we could do a whole session on like stuff that got better in Kalish's practice because of H. pylori, because some of these stories are so incredible, you know, you can't even really wrap your mind around it. So I don't know the answer to that because I don't have any healthy people that I found it on, except for the asymptomatic carriers that are spouses or whatnot.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, what do you think about a statement that says H. pylori lives in Candida and that you will not eradicate it unless you eradicate Candida?
Well, you know, these bugs are, think about it, like these bugs are self-centered and focused on their own personal lives, you know, and they don't really care much about us other than that if we're dead, then they're not going to have anywhere to live. So they, you know, they may cripple us and cause chronic health problems, but, you know, not too many people die from H. pylori or not too many people die from yeast overgrowth. So the yeast is in the small intestine, maybe large intestine. It's trying to overgrow, occupy as much space as it can, grab all the nutrients it can from every time you eat your Haagen-Dazs ice cream or whatever, you know, sugars that you're doing. The H. pylori is trying to live its best life in your stomach, doing it what it can. There's a couple trillion million other bacteria, and they're all competing for space and resources, you know? And so if you, for example, kill, I don't know, what's a good example? Maybe like cryptosporidium, like you kill a parasite in the small intestine or large intestine. Does that mean that everything's going to be okay? Well, not necessarily, because there could be some yeast lurking in there. And now that the crypto's gone, whew, the yeast proliferates. It's got more resources, more room. And there's only a certain number of microorganisms that can exist in a gram of stool, right? So it's like it's like a really highly compressed compartment building without a lot of room. You're trying to cram more, a certain number of people you could cram into this building. And so the relationships between these bugs are something I've studied for a lot. And all I can say is it's so complicated, it's hard to even understand what's going on. But they are, in general, existing in different parts of the GI tract, stomach, small intestine, or large intestine. And then they're all competing for the same basic resources and the ability to get at our food, basically, or get at the food from each other, because some of these organisms generate byproducts that feed other organisms, right? There's like whole sets of bacteria that make hydrogen gas, and then there's a whole other sets of commensal bacteria that consume that gas, right? So it's this whole, I don't know, system, of competition, and everyone's kind of looking out for themselves. I don't know if that answered the question, because I didn't really get the question, but that's kind of my.
Great, thank you. The next question asks, can you treat H. pylori and C. diff at the same time? And if not, which do you treat first?
Yeah, so every year I try to treat H. pylori and yeast, or H. pylori and C. diff, or H. pylori and Giardia. I've tried that every year, and sometimes I get away with it, sometimes not so much. And in fact, it's probably been maybe 2 or 3 years since I've tried it, so maybe I've learned my lesson. My current attitude towards it, as a slightly older, kind of crotchety doctor who doesn't like people calling and complaining about stuff anymore, is that I just avoid it like the plague. So I always treat H. pylori first, and I always treat it by itself, simply because I've had enough phone calls on the weekend from patients where I tried to push it and do things extra fast and combine H. pylori treatments with something else, and it just backfires and the person starts to feel sick. And so I just stopped doing that.
Great, thank you. The next question asks, how do you approach a GI map showing H. pylori level of E2?
If you look at the test, here's the deal. The way they do these markers, you see it says 1.0 e to the third. That's an exponent, right? So that means normal. That really, if they were going to write that out in a regular number, it would be 1,000, because that's 1 with 3 zeros, e to the third, right? And then in this case, this patient's number is 4.4 e to the fourth. That's 4.4 with 4 zeros, or 4 decimal points. Let's see, I don't know, it's going to be a big number, something like that, I think. Let's see, is that 4? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it's going to be 44,000. So 44,000 is clearly a lot bigger than 1,000. That means that the person is over the normal limit, because it's a quantitative test, right? They're not saying you have H. pylori or you don't. They're giving you a number of this whole DNA amplification thing. They have all these fancy machines that these guys run, right? And so the question then is, what if it's 4e to the second? And what does that even mean? 4e to the second means a 4 with 2 decimal points. So that would be 400, right? There's 1, 2. Right? So let's say it's a 4e to the second, e to the 2, that would be 400. But wait a minute, normal is anything under 100. So now we're in a conundrum, because is it normal? Well, abnormal is over 1,000. So everyone agrees that's bad. Probably you should treat it. But what if it's detected, but it's below the normal level? Then I look at the patient and I think, okay, do you have like 16 different digestive problems? Well, even though it's underneath the normal level, we did detect it, let's kill it. If I look at them and they're perfectly healthy, they have a great marriage. Their 3 kids are all at Stanford, and they're all going to go to law school and become heads of some, environmental organization, and all the way going back to their great grandparents. Everyone's always been healthy. There's no alcoholics. There's no drug addiction. No one ever died of anything except for old age, peacefully on Martha's Vineyard, and they all sail, and they're just like perfect people. I probably wouldn't treat it. But obviously those people don't exist, right? Because in my practice, everyone's kind of sick. And half the people are alcoholic and the other half have drug problems. And people got stuff going on. They got depression. And I feel like my general personal philosophy on this is that we got the technology here to test this stuff. In my practice, I don't want any of my patients walking around with a digestive tract infection because I just think they're bad news. And I've found clinically, in terms of results, time and time again, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, over and over again, that even with a little H. pylori, getting rid of it makes a really big difference symptomatically for people. And so I do it. That's sort of my general attitude.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kalish. That is all the questions we have time for. So thank you so much, Dr. Kalish, and thank you everybody for listening.
Appreciate it very much. Look forward to our next one. Thank you.
Bye.